Hello everybody, welcome back to the Grand Torino. Starting on a new series of interviews for the start of 2019. I want to thank you all very much for your continued support and your words of encouragement. And I'd like to also remind you, if you're new to the channel, please like, subscribe and press the little blue bell, and you'll be reminded of future broadcasts as we go forward on the Grand Torino for the start of this new year. Delighted to bring to you a new guest, but before I go in there, I want to just say thank you for all the patrons that have reached out with their support. Had an extended break at the beginning of January, so I wasn't able to get out and about as much as I had due to personal family issues. But delighted to kick off this new interview with Justin Barrett. Justin,
thanks very much, City.
Thanks very much for agreeing to sit down. Before we get off, I want to preface my first question with I think Jim Jeffries. I think Jim Jeffries is a two-bit hack comedian. Is no longer relevant or funny, only because he has to use canned laughter. And I noted that from your interview. Now I'm delighted that we're getting this chance, and I'm not going to go down all the other split-off conversations. But what I was taken back was the quotation, whether it was taken out of context or direct context, was the death penalty for doctors.
Well, you could say it was taken out of context in the sense it was a general conversation about, given that I believed that the National Party believed that abortion should remain illegal, given that the 8th Amendment held that the unborn child's right to life is equal to the right to life of the mother, therefore what criminal sanctions should be imposed on people who first of all, who had an abortion. And I said, in that context, you'd have to understand that it would very much depend on the circumstances of the woman in question. You know, if she's under a lot of psychological strain, if she's under very strenuous circumstances, and coercion is often a big part of it, either by her family, by a boyfriend, even by husbands even, that you would have to take that into account in saying that the degree to which the woman who actually goes for an abortion is actually guilty of having killed her child is much diminished, and in some cases there would be no guilt in any real sense at all. It wouldn't be her fault. And he said, but you still want criminal penalties. And I said, you have to put criminal penalties in for instances where people are not under those stressful circumstances. In fact, they can be very casual about it. Not always, but they can be. And it is true that some people have abortions out of convenience, and that there should be a criminal penalty in that case. And he said, following on the logic, he said, and what about the doctors who perform the abortions? And I said, well, you're talking about abortionists full time. This is their job. They kill babies on a daily basis for money. They're never under any coercion. They're never under any stress. They're never under any psychological pressure. Their minds are clear. They know exactly what they're doing. They're surgeons. They know biology backwards. They have no doubt about the development of the child. They literally, when they're performing abortion, have to take the child out piece by piece. So this idea that they don't know, a lot of women who have abortions, even after they've had the abortions, don't know what has actually happened to them.
What it entails, yeah.
But the doctors, and one of the most striking things that I've heard with regard to abortion, really stuck in my head very early on, was that in order to ensure that the operation has been completed, they have to, in surgical abortion, they have to put the pieces back together on the tray beside. So they have the jigsaw back.
To make sure that they've extracted there's no tissue left inside the woman's womb. I understand that, but going back to the context of the
so I said, in that context, I said, you're talking about a cold-blooded killer. And you're talking about a cold-blooded killer for money. And you're talking about somebody who's capable of most gruesome of acts. And he said, doesn't your party believe in in the death penalty for heinous crimes. And I said, yeah, for particularly heinous crimes. So he said, so what would you say the doctors who perform abortions should get? And I said the death penalty. Now, I realised that that's, to say the least, is probably out of tune with the majority view in the country. I mean,
it's a very extreme position. I'm not for the death penalty myself, I wouldn't say, but I don't castigate anyone for expressing their opinion.
The fact of the matter is we know now that 2/3 of Irish people, or at least the Irish electorate, don't believe abortion is a crime at all, of any kind, ever. Never mind a heinous crime.
That's such a shame.
Then you have to get to the third that voted no, and how many of them would regard it as heinous a crime as I believe it is, as opposed to just being something that they prefer not to happen. So I realise it's an extreme position in one sense, but in the other sense it's following the logic. It's following the logic of what they've done, and I'd say, it was Jim Jeffries. I realised he was going for the comedic element, and there would be a degree of that attempted. I don't think he really succeeded there, to be honest, and the comedic element. I think he brought me to the logical conclusion of what I believe, that abortion is such a heinous crime that somebody who does it for money, under no stress whatsoever, under no coercion, under no extreme circumstances, under no psychological.
You're making that comparison to God's. Let's say like the person that's done something like nearly 100,000 abortions and had kept samples and kept bodies. Was it like if you go watch that movie?
Yeah, exactly.
Online, that kind of abortionist.
Exactly.
That's the criteria.
Yeah, that's when you get to your
that's where you go to your logical conclusion. Now I don't want to dwell on Jim Jeffries. Now I want to park that bus. I think that's a very good answer back, but it gives it some sort of context. Because the way that shit show was portrayed,
oh yeah. Well, for one thing, I'm on air for about 2 minutes, which is a credit to me, I think, because that's all they could use. But that was an hour and a half of an interview, and that's all they could use.
Well, and
he picked out that line, and I see it's an extreme line, but I'm talking about extreme circumstances as well. We're not talking about like traffic tickets, like the death penalty for traffic tickets here. Like
I get that,
it's a heinous crime, and he took the one line. So did he take it out of context? Well, no. I said what I meant to say. I followed the logic of my argument. So I can't say that it was a falsification of my opinion, but it lacked nuance that I gave it in the interview, and it was blunt, and it wasn't delivered as bluntly in the actual interview. It was edited to look far blunter, far cruder, and thicker, to be blunt.
So, taking things to their logical conclusion, the second question kind of tied in with that is, as I kind of described, is self-awareness and self-perception. You were part, you'd come in with some critique, or for some critique as yourself as the leader of the party and stuff like that. But when your social media presence, the Twitter has kind of attacked other parties that are kind of in conjunction, going in the same line with yourself. And I see different accounts, might have slided or attacked, like our exit, and you would say, maybe our exit kind of came at us first and stuff like that. The whole point that I'm kind of getting around to interviewing all these figureheads such as yourselves is I think there's going to come a period of time, and I think we're getting close to that junction now, where there needs to be some sort of coalescence. Where we don't start punching right or punching left, as they say. We start moving towards in the same direction and stop the in-house fighting. And move towards the same line. Now, I've been thinking about a few different conversations. My only gripe, my personal gripe, is the youth. The guys that you have out canvassing, the activists. I think they're all very clever and intelligent young men, but idealistic young men.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And
absolutely, the best that Ireland's youth has to offer.
Absolutely, all credible. But To me, it's the uniformity that kind of creeps into the look with the trousers and the shirt and stuff like that. I don't see young men dressing like that,
Well, okay, I can't speak to that in the sense that I don't tell people how to dress, and the party doesn't have a uniform, and if people are starting to dress in a certain way that looks somewhat uniform, I haven't noticed it, right? I haven't noticed it, except I think the fact that I wear a tie all the time kind of has led people to think they should wear a tie. And I don't always wear a green tie, but the young fellas prefer to express their nationalism, if you like, symbolically by wearing a green tie. And so you're on your way to a uniform without actually thinking like in uniform terms.
I get that.
Yeah, they want to say
the likes of the people, the parties coalescing. Would you, if you weren't to be set ahead as say that like the Taoiseach's position or the head of that party, say the coalitions of the NP, Identity Ireland, IREGs, and all these new parties that are forming, and I know with Renewal as well, Neil O'Mahony coming out very strongly and stuff like that. You know, a lot of strong rhetoric that we're all seem to be heading by. If there was a coalescence there, would you say, look, I don't mind working in the background, or I don't mind taking this position?
I have, in my whole life, I have worked in organisations where I have not had the head position. God help me, years ago in my innocence, I was in Young Fine Gael. And you want to try entryism, Trotskyite entryism from the right by one individual by themselves. It doesn't work.
How do you even consider to be conservative these days?
Well, I know. Well, like they would have been pseudo-conservative then, but they'd have been fairly liberal even then. But I took the position I took, and I was the PRO of the local common, and I was a delegate at various conferences and whatever, and there was a career map lined out.
You've been around, I was going to say, because I didn't give people a chance to give up the background, but because we're short on time with these things, and I think we've a lot to cover. So for my American audience or people that's abroad, worldwide, just Wikipedia, well, not Wikipedia, Google Justin Barrett, leader of the National Party here in Ireland. So I probably should have thrown that in at the preamble, Justin, but like I said, a lot to get through, so I want to try and cram in. So going back, sorry.
So there was a career path laid out for me in Young Fine Gael, into Fine Gael, onto the council, and your usual career path. But ideologically that wasn't possible. When I got involved in the pro-life movement especially, and the anti-European federalist movement, the First Niece campaign, for example, which I would have had a fairly prominent role in terms of being on TV and radio. I wasn't the chairman of that. The late Rory O'Hanlon, Judge Rory O'Hanlon, was the chair of that. Oh, wonderful man. Very clear mind, very sound in every way that a man can be sound.
But you've seen these warning signs earlier on though, Justin, sorry, with being in Fine Gael and all that, because Nice, I wasn't too aware because I was travelling around, I had my head down, chasing the mortgage, all that kind of stuff, as I would say, most normal people are trying to, especially with the way things are now, two families, the family being decimated, with both parents being out to work and the children being catered for now by the state, in all aspects now, indoctrination and all that kind of stuff. I think we'll get to that kind of stuff in other conversations, Justin, if you don't mind, but we know we're on the same page there. Yeah,
well, the only reason I mention it is at the time it was suggested to me that I should be the chairman of that group, and I went, no, I don't have the national profile for that. We have to get somebody, and the discussion went around, and I went, let's ask Judge Rory O'Hanlon. So I don't, in any sense, push myself forward there and say, look, I have to be the leader of anything that I see Renewal moving to the right. I know I personally made a number of negative statements regarding Renewal at one point. I think they've done a couple of silly things that we don't need to get into now, but Neil O'Mahony in particular I think is a very powerful influence within that organisation, moving it, as I would call, to the right, perhaps you call it to the right as well, but to common sense And
Common sense, that's all
and
about it, yeah.
I see a change there, and I hope people have seen a change in the sense that my criticism of Renew has stopped as it's progressed in the direction away from Eddie Hobbs and disintegrating, shall we say, onto the road of common sense. The same goes for our exit. Our exit is, I know Herman from years back, worked in the pro-life movement with him. Back then, neither of us were leaders as such. But the work was the important thing. I think both of those parties are part of what I would call the national resistance, in the sense that they exist for the purpose of defending the Irish people and the Irish nation. And this is the reason the National Party exists too.
Yeah.
Now, I might take the view that on certain strategic matters, they're perhaps not going about things precisely the right way. And I also might say that some of the policies are not correct, or some of the principles are not exactly right. But if we were to sit down at a table, myself and a few representatives of the National Party, say Neil O'Mahony, a few representatives of Renew, Herman, a few representatives of Exit, the main topic for discussion would not be who's going to be the leader. Good. That, from my point of view anyway, good. It would certainly not be that I have to be the leader. It would be about the substance of the principles that the party would stand for and the strategy that it pursued to achieve them. If that was a sensible strategy, let me just throw in here, for example, and since we're all being palsy about who we like and who's on our side, is that Peadar Tobin has started a new party. It's supposed to be a pro-life party, but other than that, it's just your basic Sinn Féin without the abortion. Now, Sinn Féin 10 years ago was Sinn Féin without the abortion. So, I don't see that party as part of a group that I could sit down with and form, because it's not a question of Peadar Tobin being the leader. It's a question of the fact that on everything else but abortion, they've got it wrong, and it will go wrong. It may succeed electorally because a lot of pro-life people are supporting it, and I don't see why they don't see through it. But I do know, or at least I know Herman for a long time, so I know that he is coming from the right place. I know his heart is in the right place, and I know his head. He's an intelligent man, so his head can be put in the right place, as it were, without too much difficulty. I know Neil O'Mahony just a little bit. Same thing is Watcott. He seems to be a good man, sound man, very very much cares about the country as I do. Again, it would be a matter of discussing how such a coalition would work, but the leadership would certainly not be an issue that would break on.
Fantastic in a sense that clarifies that position, right?
No, so it would be if I thought there was if I thought there was a mistake being made, then I'd have to try and talk people out of that, but I serve. Right, I'm the leader of the National Party. That's my title. Somebody has to have the title. But I don't regard myself as doing anything but serving Ireland. That's all I've ever viewed myself as doing. And in any position I've ever held in any organisation, and I've held high and low and in between and all the rest of it, that's the view I've taken. And like I go out in the rain and put up posters like everybody else. I have no notions of grandiosity, none at all.
Good for you. So I want to jump on to the next article now. I've got away from those three main characters. I want to kind of bring us up to relevancy of today, what's happening, like in light of the arson attack with Brewski over the weekend. I don't really want to touch on that specifically and stuff like that, but
yeah.
What I think I want to kind of get into is what's current about as well. There's a YouTube video kicking around by Stefan Molyneux, I encourage anybody that's not seen it, particularly in my Irish audience, just type in Stefan Molyneux, the Truth for Ireland 2040. And in that YouTube broadcast, and I know you've watched it, you've said you have seen it. Now I only touched on it this morning, same as I did with the Voice and the Jim Jeffries things, because I wanted to have that initial response to it that other people got, and I think you would have seen that and switched off to you.
I get
see that. So that's why I wanted to touch on that. And the reason I mentioned Stefan Molyneux and stuff like that is because, regardless of what you think of certain people might think of Stefan and his use of criteria for IQ and all this kind of stuff, I want to focus on what his initial message was the document for 2040. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Now let me just give it a kind of a lead in for you before I ask you to answer the question. In his opening gambit there, he was saying that the document, which was constructed by Francis Fitzgerald, was the 2040 importation now of 1 million new people. And as Stefan ascribes it there, and the thing that sticks in my craw is it says if it's an inevitability, is if we don't have any say over this. You know what I mean? Because we're tied in there with the EU, which was never in its remit to begin with. That the controlling of nation states still have to control. And it's overreaching now. It's like for me the saying is the frog has jumped the pot now. We can say, hang on a minute here. You're taking, you're sticking your chin out here a little bit now. Do you know what I mean? In that context, they've overstepped the mark. So I want to preface that. I encourage you to go and watch Stefan Molyneux, and you'll get that lead in, and you'll see the statistics about the migration of importation. So that's going to give me that question is, say you were to take, let's spin a couple of plates, as I often say, analogize, let's hypothesize. Say you were to take government, and you were put in, say, as head of state or Taoiseach in another sort of sense. Your first 6 months in government, what would that look like?
First 6 months in government, not a hell of a lot you can do in 6 months, given they've spent since the foundation of the state wrecking the place. I always say is the Irish Republic died on a corner in Ballinablaw. Now that in of itself might be a controversial thing to say.
But you see Italy, where they cleared out the heads of the medical industry. They're not the heads of the medical department.
Yes.
The department of, you know what I'm getting at. But she cleared out the whole heads. Effectively got rid of all the civil servants and started again with a new ethos.
Well, but except that's difficult to do because you don't. You see, you might find that, and this is what I find with most civil servants as well, is they're technocrats. So as technocrats, they do what they're told by their bosses. So what you would have to do, like say with the civil service, the heads of the health department or the education department, I'd be more worried about the education department actually, and the indoctrination of our children, especially the whole LGBT agenda.
Very
all
much
of that's coming in. Totally. It's a funny thing in Ireland that when Fianna Fáil has not been in government, it's been Fine Gael Labour. Labour has always taken in any coalition government the position of education minister. You watch it all the way back.
Very good point.
To the first inter-party government, 1948, all the way that far back. Always asked for that, not the Ministry for Finance.
I totally agree with you, Justin. It's very insipid. Our education system, especially what brings me into there is that I've come in contact with guys that are in college now as well. My friends' kids and stuff, they're 18 and 19. And some of them are very intimidated. They wouldn't agree with what the professors or the lecturers are saying, but are free to speak their mind because they don't want to get marked down. They don't want their opinions to be voiced out there because the whole school or the control and voice, the LGBT that's inside academia and all that kind of stuff. The professors, there's no alternative kind of voices.
Well, what I would say is with the civil service, what you would need to do is you need to bring in the heads of the department, and you need to see who are the technocrats. In other words, who will follow the new line, as it were. And they were only just, as the phrase goes, they were just doing their job, and these were the orders they were given. And who are the ideologues? Who are the ones who believe this nonsense? And who will obstruct change, and who will obstruct constructive change as we go forward, because they're ideologically committed to this cultural Marxist agenda, and who because you don't want to gut the civil service of everybody who's capable of doing anything either.
We're looking for committed activists, political activists that are entrenched in academia and don't allow oppositional discussion or oppositional points of view.
Exactly. And and apart from anything else is that cultural Marxists make for bad lecturers, the same as economic Marxists make for bad economists.
My goes where socialism always ends in genocide and starvation. And
it has to. And then
with accusations of fascism, the way that's thrown out, that's the group taking preference over the individual. In essence, in itself. That's all you need to know about fascism. The group takes preference over the individual. I'm about property rights. I'm about the rule of law. Kind of stuff.
Well, you see, again, there's a balance to be struck. There's the common good as well. There is the common good, and the individual can't take precedence over the common good. But where there is this statism, is what I would call it. It's which is. It really doesn't matter what ideological bent that takes, whether it goes to the right or whether it goes to the left.
Go left or right.
Is if it's every part of an individual's life is dictated by the state, then you have a recipe for crisis. And we have an extraordinary situation in this country at the moment where the youth of the nation have been fooled into thinking they have all these choices that they didn't have when this Catholic Church had this hegemonic position. Now, I don't know to what extent the Catholic Church did have that hegemonic position. I didn't have it in my lifetime, shall we say. And that takes you back a while, right? It takes you back to the 70s. Let's leave it at that. The church was a powerful influence in Irish society. It was powerful politically. It was very influential, but it was far from hegemonic even at that point. But they've been convinced that they've been released, and 18 to 24-year-olds convinced that they've been released from this Catholic pressure that was never on
there. No.
It never existed in any form during their lifetime. And they've been handed this freedom, and the freedom they've been handed is to do whatever you like sexually.
Yeah.
The freedom you have is to do everything you like in terms of taking like hallucinogenic drugs of any kind, or if you want to go on the softer end of it, drink yourself to death. Where the state's grand with that, no difficulty whatsoever with that. But everywhere else, every other part of your life, we will control, and
including whether you as government employees have to take the flu vaccine.
Yeah.
Even if you don't agree with it.
Exactly.
That kind of stuff. Even though today, if you look online, there's actual quantifiable evidence that there is detrimental effects given by vaccines. So I let the science speak for itself. I still don't get caught up in that thing, but there is. Come out of the University of America, go look it up.
I mean, like every day of the year, the government comes out with a new law that's restricting in some way. I mean, in particular, the one I'm thinking about at the moment is Shane Ross, since he's become Minister for Transport. The crackdown on learner drivers is ridiculous. Over the top. It's way over the top.
The insurance costs here, I have children 21 and 20 as well.
Yeah.
And the money that they're paying, you could buy 2 cars.
Yeah.
The money they have to pay for insurance.
Well,
because of the lack of competition. Because
here's my view on that. To take insurance as a specific is that if you're going to make it illegal not to have insurance, then you must have a state scheme. You can't let private companies that you have to buy the product from set the price.
Yeah.
You can't have profit made and then say it's illegal not to buy the product. The whole point of the free market is freedom. With car insurance, you must buy it. It's illegal not to buy it. It's illegal not to drive without it. So therefore, the state should provide it at a reasonable fee and without a profit, and should have a reasonable attitude to young learner drivers in that sense. Because that's real. That to me is real freedom. I mean, anybody growing up will know the first time you get behind the wheel of the car and you can go wherever you like.
Great sense of independence.
There's a feeling of freedom there
Maturity,
that has nothing to do with like theoretical.
Coming of age, having your first set of wheels.
So I think.
For men and women, for boys and girls.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's this area like of promiscuity and drugs. Where there seems to be this massive liberalisation.
Carte blanche, whatever you want.
And then we'll control everything else. Absolutely every other aspect of your life. For example, going back to the original question, it's the question of abortion. You can have an abortion. You can have a child killed. But how many couples can have a child born? How many couples make the decision that we simply can't afford any child, or we can't afford a second child, or we can't afford a third child? We have nowhere to live. What I call the working homeless.
Working poor.
They're effectively homeless. I mean, they're doing full-time jobs. They're half the money that they earn is taken in tax. Never mind that they're not well paid in the first place, considering we're supposed to be in a boom economy.
0-hour contracts, everybody chasing, and then another lower tier of workers coming in.
Yeah, and then they can't afford to buy a house, and they can't afford even to rent a flat or to live by themselves. So you've got all these people in their late 20s, early 30s, living at home with their parents out of no choice. And they're told they're free now because the local parish priest doesn't tell them what to do. It's a complete mockery. You can't, if we're talking choice here, then you should also have the choice to form a family, have children, I've never pursued material gains to any great extent, which is why I have nothing except the clothes on my back. What?
Meet your brother.
But as a modest like dwelling house is not a big thing to have an ambition for.
No.
For the ordinary working man and woman.
A young family starting out.
And I don't think it should necessarily require double income either.
No.
But the current economic circumstances create that. So what would I do in the first 6 months?
Yeah. Thanks for bringing me back.
First of all, we have to deal with the fact that which is a huge issue and difficult to get into here. But I, again, as you say, advise people, look it up on the internet.
Yeah.
Look up fractional reserve banking system and how private banks create money. And that's how debt
That system
exists.
is going to crash, Justin. I'm watching the gold standard and the silver standard are primed and ready to skyrocket because the fiat currency with the quantitative easing it's blanket, it's choked itself beyond.
It is,
and anybody paying attention to the markets know that there's a big a reset. Like if President Trump goes after the Fed and audits the Fed, which Rand Paul introduced a bill for, that has serious consequences because they might go back to a gold-backed standard.
Oh yeah, they'll give him his wall rather than they'll give him that. As Amschel Rothschild said, give me the power to print a nation's currency, and I care not who makes his laws. Because in practice, money is power, and that now at the moment lies in the hands of private banks, who produce nothing. That's the important thing here, because again, people talk about wealth inequality. I don't care how unequal society is in wealth terms, so long as the poor are not too poor. I don't care how rich the rich are.
Our wages haven't risen anything. We've been stagnant, and now they've got this inflation.
Exactly.
The price of goods now creeping up.
Exactly.
Last year, I think one of the works said in Tesco's the loaf of bread was something to $2.20. Now it's up at $2.75. No, like your groceries are going. You don't even see that.
And you get from the
everybody's focusing on the petrol petrol pump.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? It's going through, it's getting ridiculous up and down. And 75% of it is taxed.
yeah, I know.
By the state.
Yeah.
No more paying.
But the socialist answer to that, and the answer by all of the parties is, well, we'll sit around and we'll talk about wealth equality and the gap. And what they actually mean by that is they don't mind if the poor get poorer so long as the rich don't get richer. Now, that's not my attitude at all. What we have to look at absolute levels of poverty and make sure that nobody falls below the absolute level of poverty, and there's no reason why anybody should. And after that, I have no difficulty and I have no jealousy of a man or a woman who has many hundreds of millions. I don't care what they have, so long as they have earned it. But private banks who have created money and then charged interest off of real working people who have to get up every morning, in Leo's famous words, get up early every morning and go to work and earn a bare living for a family smaller than they would prefer to have, probably, in a rented accommodation which they will never own. And that debt is then has to be paid back to a bank that simply created it out of thin air. That's a huge. That I would say, along with the immigration issue, and easier to solve in many ways, is issue number one, is that the state should be the only one empowered to create currency. No private creation of currency. Legal tender should be created by the state. There's an argument whether it should be backed by commodities,
what about the natural resources of the world?
Yeah, there's that argument. But even fiat currency in state control is better than fiat currency in the hands of private banks.
That's an economic argument.
That's an economic argument.
There, yeah.
But my point is these people are getting very rich and they are not doing any work. That's to be crude about it. They are not doing any work and they're getting very rich not doing anything.
What about our professional classes? I've alluded to in other previous conversations, like the immigration industry. Let's not talk about the immigrants themselves or the refugees. Let's talk about the immigration industry here in Ireland. Like, going back to the 6 months in power, illegal immigration. These agencies that are springing up now, assisted by outside agencies to facilitate people to get there, to go through the navigation of getting citizenship or stuff like that, illegally.
Yeah, and CEOs of so-called charities on 150,000, 200,000 a year. Now, I don't mind if a man or woman earns 200,000 a year or $500,000 or $1 million, but
it's working against the state of the nation.
But if the actual purpose is to facilitate it, crime. I mean, that's what illegal immigration is. They try and turn it into this moral argument. It's never been a
bleeding hearts in it. We see the one or two bad cases. Obviously, there's refugees out there.
The only moral argument that's here actually is on our side, which is the moral argument that the nation has a right to exist. The nation has a right to exist, and the Irish people have the right to decide, the same as you or I have the right to decide who comes into our home. We have, as a nation, the right to decide who comes into our country. That's the moral question.
Hippity-hoppity, respect my property.
And now, one would hope that most people would be charitable on a daily basis as they interact with each other. In terms of you don't lock your door to everybody, including your neighbours. And the phrase that I always use is you don't lock your door at night because you hate the people outside. You lock the door at night because you love the people inside.
I know.
And that's crucial to the National Party's view of the world. That's crucial to our idea, the national idea, as we would call it, and that's where the common good comes in. As much freedom for the individual as possible within the context of understanding that while these freedoms come from the national community, they're protected by the national community. I protect your freedoms, you protect my freedoms. We owe a debt to each other in that sense. And therefore there's a responsibility back. So you don't get that when you have masses of immigrants who come in to ghetto areas and turn them into little countries of their own. And it doesn't matter whether
fractional.
it doesn't matter whether they themselves personally, as individuals, are good people or bad people. There's an in-group preference that every human being has naturally inbuilt in them, and so do they. And they when push comes to shove, they are them and we are us. And when it's in small numbers and it's charity, and we understand it's charity, not as is stated by some of these NGOs, we have an obligation. Yeah. No, we have zero obligation.
Not an inevitability.
Yeah, we have zero obligation. I think we should be charitable, and I think in being charitable, there are certain cases in which refugees, genuine refugees. Yeah. That's the first thing.
20% current UN figures. 20% of genuine refugees.
And they're not making all the way to Ireland because they couldn't, because they're supposed to seek refuge in the first safe country.
So our state is transporting people. You know, it's under the design of the 2040. It's saying that the inevitability movement of people. But if the Irish Navy is going down to Italy and bringing people back, if their state is going down and saying, well, we'll take your quota because Austria, Poland won't take them. And now we're being backloaded. And I noticed today that the immigration agency posted out advertising looking for guest houses and bed and breakfasts now, to looking for state contracts for refugees or migrants. Now, because of that UN migration, it doesn't. If it's just a movement of people and we're facilitated for, it's going against the wishes. It's going against every common sense argument that you can have. Because if you don't allow people to integrate over time, if you rush it and push it and overfill it, you're going to fracture the whole.
You're going to fracture society, and what you're going to get. And this is my nightmare scenario. Because somebody asked me recently, what do you see it ending up as? Worst case scenario, and I don't see some people, like obviously the multi-cults types, see happiness and joy and all the rest of it, and there's no problem.
Well, there's the two Scandinavian girls that were travelling around on a recent trip to Morocco. What I see as the most likely scenario is, and again, it's in living memory for me, is the Yugoslavian situation, where that country came apart, and the atrocities that people committed against each other, people who had been good people, I assume, neighbours and friends
turned on each other because they were afraid if they didn't hit their neighbour first, they were going to get hit. And
I would say facilitated under the UN flag, because it did nothing.
Yeah, it did nothing.
Now we have medal awards out in Africa for our defence forces.
Yeah.
So they're being drafted in around the world and put in harm's way.
Yeah.
Fighting on behalf of the foreign government.
I don't think Irish soldiers should be in uniform in any other country but Ireland. That's what I've always held, is that the purpose of an Irish soldier is to defend.
No one questions the bravery of a soldier. No one questions.
Of course not.
But if its commanders are putting it in harm's way when it's only designed to be a defence force,
exactly.
It's the defence force of the world.
Yeah, exactly. And to put them as like along the border. I mean, there's huge courage in standing along the peace line in the Lebanon. There's huge courage being demanded of the average for the average soldier. But the question is, if a huge courage is being demanded of him, for what? And I tell you, going back to what we were talking about before, economic circumstances, I tell you, one of the reasons is that they cannot afford to live on the wages that they are paid as soldiers at home. And there is a special bonus paid if you go into a danger zone. And I have known many soldiers.
It's encouraging. I know exactly the same thing you're going to say. I just know a lad that's just come through 10 weeks, I think it's 20 weeks of basic training, €3 a day or something like that. He's not even going to finish off on the thing, finish it off. But the conditions, and even the married personnel that I know, in service now and stuff like that, be encouraged not to have children.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, to keep the wages down, or the wages are so depressed, taking up second positions and stuff like that, and then you'll have to go and fight.
And it's the only thing that'll bring in a few extra euro.
Revenue,
a few extra euro for the soldier that will actually make it possible for him to survive, that he should put his life at risk for any other purpose than for the, as you say, the defence forces. The defence forces of where? The defence forces of the Irish Republic should be the defenders of the Irish Republic, not a border in Yugoslavia, not a border in Somalia, not a border in Lebanon, not anywhere else.
Well, we must pay homage to all our defence forces, the Navy as well. Volunteer services around the world.
Absolutely.
But our Navy manning ships that they feel aren't adequately crewed.
Yeah.
For the types of passengers, not the passengers that they're picking up, just to maintain the ship's safety.
The safety
at sea.
Yeah. The equipment
put them at
is,
risk because they don't seem.
And I mean, we send our soldiers out, doing ridiculous tasks sometimes. Shoveling snow, for example. This is not what the army is for.
Our Navy should be protecting our Navy should be protecting our waters and
our
fisheries.
Our fishing
Industry.
exactly.
And our army should be at home protecting our borders.
Yeah,
here.
and they should be properly paid. And this is when I say I would like to see a complete free market, except for this, that there should be a safety net whereby we aim at making nobody in the country living in absolute poverty. Is that we have members of the defence forces living in absolute poverty. What would be defined as, not by some economist somewhere, as a measure of GDP or per capita, just actually not
Basic
enough
humanity.
Not enough money to put food on the table, to put petrol in the car. I mean, we hear of soldiers sleeping in their cars at the weekend when they're not allowed to stay in the barracks because they can't drive home and drive back because they can't afford the diesel or the petrol to do that. So we have soldiers sleeping in their cars. And then we're going to ask them, perhaps at some point, to lay down their lives in defence of us after we've treated them that way. Well, I would say, and I was listening to a program coming up on to do this interview, and they were talking about, we shouldn't call the government them. The government are we. No, they're them. They're them. And they're them. So I would say to any soldier is literally, and I would plead with him, is don't blame me. I'm not responsible. If I were responsible, again back to the 6 months in government, if I were responsible, the simplest thing to sort out would be our defence forces and to pay them a decent wage. The simplest thing in the world is just pay them a decent wage, buy decent equipment for them. It wouldn't even be a lot of money, comparatively speaking. It certainly wouldn't be anything like the 64 billion that was used to bail out banks who went back to profiteering off the backs of Irish families again as soon as the crisis was over.
Or the further borrowing of 50 billion to avoid the 3% rise in interest rates to do, and so they want us to borrow 50 billion now. So where's that going to go? But
we're
aware of that. Justin, I'm cognizant of the time. I think we'll kind of wrap it up here. I think it was a very great conversation. I hope you'll agree we'll come back and do a few more as well.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, JT. Thanks for having me.
Okay, I'd like to thank Justin for coming along and sitting down and agreeing to sit down and have a great interview. I thought it was a thoroughly enjoyable conversation. I think we could touch on a multitude of subjects, but we could have gone any which way, several different conversations. So, Justin, we'll get back and we'll definitely touch upon a few other points of conversation again. First interview of 2019. 21st of January is the actual centenary of the Republic of Ireland. There's an actual commemoration. I'll probably be covering that. Keeping my going forward on to different interviews coming forward. Have another raft of great guests lined up for you, and maybe one or two surprises as well. That I hope you keep you going. If you're new to the channel, I'd ask you to press the like button, also press the little subscription button, and press the little blue bell, and you'll be reminded of future broadcasts here in the Gran Torino. And look forward to seeing you on the next one. Wuss.